So let's get started. So let's say you don't have a VPN and you want to talk with Google. So let's draw that example. So this is your computer. Let's have the Google server. So when I say Google, like I said, it means any company that you might, have exchanges with over the internet. So it could be Google, Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, anything, any online service.
Okay.
Okay. So what usually happens when you want to talk to Google? So because we don't have that strong IP routing foundation, I'm actually going to be referring to a lot of these exchanges as if they were postal exchanges, as if we were exchanging letters. That's usually an analogy that's very accurate, actually, quite fitting for quite a while. It's only really when we get into the nitty-gritty of like the technicalities that it starts being a bit wonky, but for what we're gonna do, it's perfectly fitting.
Okay.
So let's say you want to send Google a letter. So that could be, for instance, if we're talking a little bit technical, so it makes a little bit of sense. This is like you want to send an HTTP request.
Yeah.
Okay. Or even HTTPS, let's say. So what happens to it? Well, to that HTTP request, from a technical perspective, you're going to be encapsulating it in an IP header. And again, not going to go into too much details as to what that means. But in practice, it's like we have, on the one hand, we have the actual letter that we wrote. So that would be the HTTP request. That's the letter we wrote. And then we put that letter in an envelope. And that's what happens when we add that IP header. Okay?
Yep.
Does this make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So all that to say, what do you have on an envelope usually when you send a letter?
Well, where it is going,
Yes.
stamps so that like it can pass through the borders if it needs to.
Right.
And then
And sometimes it also has the source address, right? Where it's coming from.
Yep.
The
Just in
sender
case it needs
address.
to be sent back.
Right. So let's say that this is John Smith. And obviously, this is Google. So when I'm going to add, anytime I have an envelope like this, I'm going to assume that on that envelope is written the source address and the destination address.
Okay.
So for instance, here we have an envelope that's going from John Smith to Google.
Yeah.
What happens when they receive a letter from John Smith? Again, they receive a letter. And on that letter, it says, to Google from John Smith.
Well, they open it and they read it, right?
Yeah, they open it, they read it.
And
so they open it, they have the means to actually decrypt it, obviously.
Yeah.
Right. And so what does the letter say? Well, let's say the letter says, show me used cars. Let's say that's what the letter says, right? It's a Google request and it's asking Google, hey, could you please, like on your search engine, show me some used cars?
Mm-hmm.
Then what does Google do, naturally?
It shows John Smith some used cars.
Right. So it's going to send a reply to John Smith. And in that reply, there's going to be some pictures of cars, for instance, or some used cars, maybe. Okay, so it's going to answer the request, essentially. So I'm going to draw a terrible car like a 2-year-old would. There we go. This is a car, by the way.
Okay.
This is why I'm not a graphic designer, by the way. Okay. Do you notice what happened here? Is this really the end of the interaction?
No.
Oh, okay, so I really do mean the interaction between John Smith and Google.
Well, Hold on, can you repeat the question, please?
Okay. Is this the end of the interaction between John Smith and Google? Does either John Smith or Google need to send more messages to the other for
Mm,
this to be complete?
no,
Not really, no. From a
no.
technical perspective, yes, but like we don't care about technical. We're sort of talking in like broad spectrum. So yeah, no, this is the end of it. Now, let's say you are Google and you want to
Mhm,
make a buck. You want to make money.
mhm.
What resource do you have here that would allow you to make some more money?
The internet.
That's not really what I mean. And that's not really an answer either because, like, oh, the internet. Okay, but what do you do with it? You know? Now, what information do you like? How do you generate money? Well, one way would be that you have information that other people want, right? You have data that other people would want, and you can sell that information. Is there something that in this instance Google knows and that other people might want be interested to know?
That John Smith was looking for used cars.
Exactly. Google is now aware that John Smith, the one and only, once wanted to see used cars. So now Google can make the assumption that John Smith is actually looking for a new car. So
Mhm.
what Google can do is say, okay, I'm going to have logs. So do you know what logs are? And
Yeah.
I don't mean the wooden logs, right?
Yeah.
So can you explain that to us real quick?
It's sort of like a history of what interactions has happened. So like at this time on this day, Google received a message from John Smith. At this time on this day, Google sent replied to John Smith's message with so said response. Like that could be part of the logs.
Right. So we don't know exactly technically what's in the logs, but essentially what Google could say is, I'm going to keep logs and I'm going to keep it's like a trace, like he said, it's like a history of what has happened. And that can be anything that has happened. And one of the things that has happened is that John Smith actually asked me for used cars.
Yeah.
Why is that interesting to know? Why is that some like how can Google make money off of this?
They can sell it to advertisers for used cars.
Exactly, because then suddenly, well, maybe Toyota would like to know that, or maybe General Motors, or maybe Nissan, or whatever, right? Maybe these. Uh, so I'm not a cars man, so I don't actually know what a uh, car retail like. I don't know car retail chains or anything, but you get the idea, right? Is that
Yeah.
like now there are people, there are companies that would be interested to know that John Smith is looking for a used car. Because now
Yeah.
what can happen is that Toyota, Motors, Nissan, they can go to Google and say, okay, show him ads. Show him my ads. Right? So now
Yeah.
whenever John Smith goes on the web, goes on any page that has like, the Google AdSense thing, where it's like
Yeah.
Google Ads, or whenever John Smith browses Google in general,
Mhm.
he's going to get ads from Toyota, General Motors, Nissan, etc. Even if he's not currently looking for a new car, even if right now he didn't ask for a new car, there is a Google is aware that he wants a new car, and Google is selling that data to advertisers and making money off of it.
Yeah.
Okay, what is the sort of the moral problem with that?
Maybe John Smith didn't want his information to get out that he was looking for used cars.
Right. So we're not going to go into physical philosophical debate of what privacy is or means. However, let's assume privacy is something that you value. So privacy as in the fact that John Smith wants a new car is not public, shouldn't be public. It's a private sort of like John Smith when he asked for Google to show him used cars, what he was expecting was Google to show him used cars, and he was expecting that exchange to sort of be private.
Yeah.
Right. That's not what he got. In fact, that exchange ended up being private because it's not public. Because if it was public, then Toyota and Nissan wouldn't have, like, Google wouldn't have had to sell that data to Nissan and General Motors and whatnot.
Yeah.
So it's not public, but like we can't really say it's private either, because like it's private, and yeah, technically, you know, you have terms of service and whatnot, and technically John Smith did agree to have his data sold, literally, but like, you know, it's like it's either you sell your soul or you don't get to use the internet. So that sucks.
It
Right.
does.
Okay. And the problem is now, yeah, you have all those advertisers. And the problem is it doesn't stop here, because now what Google can say is, well, I'm going to keep logs of everything John Smith does. So he's he's looking for used cars also. But let's say Google also owns YouTube. So Google can keep track of every video that John Smith watches, right? Every YouTube video he watches. Maybe Google even keeps tracks of some of his activity on some partner websites. So I don't necessarily have anything in mind, but like let's say you're a small website and you include like some Google AdSense thing, and maybe that Google AdSense like thing that you integrated in your website, that requires you to also enable some form of tracking from Google, right? So essentially, the tentacles, the reach of that Google has online. I take the example of Google because it's the most ominous, but it's not the only one. The reach that Google has is very, very wide, and then and now suddenly it's like you live in a small town where all the businesses are owned by the same big company. And no matter where you go and what you do, that big company will see what you're doing.
Oh, wow.
Right. And now imagine it's not one big company, but it's like 3 big companies. You have, let's say, like, you have Google that's playing that game, you have Amazon, maybe you have Microsoft playing this game, and a few others and whatnot.
Yeah.
And why do they all do that? Well, because whenever they get to sell that data, they can make a profit off of it. And so they're all fighting over every scrape of your personal data. But the whole problem is that this is your personal data, and that there is no more private. It's like there is no more private exchange online.
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you protect yourself against that? So more precise. So before we get into that, what are some of the ways that these companies have to track you online? Can you name some of them? We have one example here on our screen here.
Your IP.
Exactly. So the first example is your public IP address. So again, to go on with the analogy, think of your public IP address as like your personal address.
Yeah.
Right? So your personal address is most definitely a personal data, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, anyone can show up at your front door because like the front door is public. But the fact that you live at this address, that is personal. Okay. So your public IP is one way that you can get tracked online. Do you know some other ways?
IP.
There is one that's particularly notorious.
I might not know it. Cookies, yep.
Yeah, cookies, especially trackers.
Yeah.
So cookies are simply like small bits of information that a website will store on your browser on your PC.
Okay.
So you can very well. So 2 things about that. First of all, a VPN won't help with cookies.
Okay.
And second thing is, some cookies are actually helpful and even necessary. If you, for instance, log in onto a website and you disable cookies, like, how to explain that? You're not going to be able to log, like, let's say you log in, you type your username, password, you click log in, but you have a script that wipes cookies all the time. then even though you just logged in,
Yeah.
the next page you're not going to be logged in anymore. Because the fact that you are logged in is actually stored on your PC, even if it's temporary.
Okay.
So some cookies are good. A lot of them are bad. And so the problem is sort of telling telling the wheat from the chaff.
Okay.
Okay. If I may, sort of do a quick shameless plug, a really good browser that takes care of that is actually the Brave browser. Referral link below.
Yep.
Okay. So cookies, a VP, like if you want to take care of those trackers and stuff like that, fair enough. You need to like use a good software on your PC. But that doesn't solve the issue of your public IP.